Got a really simple tip today on something that I've been doing, I guess, since about 2015, maybe, that I find has helped and I wanted to share it. I started a series a while back on why versus how, and I think this will probably end up in that playlist, and I'd actually like to explore this a lot further, but I want to show this in a really basic context that's kind of easy to hear. Let's take a listen to this section over here where we have, we got a tom fill. So let's listen to these. Okay. When we talk about mixing different elements, specifically when the elements have a really different EQ sound, when we have things that are panned out, like hard left and hard right, we get this immediate separation from those. But sometimes it's hard to differentiate if something is too loud. This really comes into play as well when you have like really dense percussion mixes. Regardless of the genre, I've mixed stuff either Latin, that's super dense, or I've mixed even funk stuff where you have this amazing funk groove with like electric guitars. Maybe you have like horn lines, you have like bass, and then you have awesome drums. But then you have a percussion stem or you have a percussion bus where there is so much going on. There's triangles, there's congas, there's all these different elements. Whenever I'm mixing something that's a dense arrangement, or in general when I'm mixing background elements, anything, I spend a lot of time mixing in mono. I didn't understand the whole concept of mixing in mono when I started, or when I heard people say that. My thought process was, hey, listen, it's not the 50s anymore. Like we have stereo. We have way more than stereo now. We have immersive and binaural and everything like that. Like who cares about mono? I think I missed the point of mixing in mono for a very long time. At least to me, mixing in mono is not about getting a mix to translate if you ever have a mono system and it needs to play back, that it needs to sound good, because it might be played back on a little tiny speaker somewhere. And I have some of those little tiny speakers. Or my daughter has some. Or, I've got a little JBL Bluetooth thing that I use to check my mixes, or I used to at one point. And it's mono. It's not stereo. So, yeah, okay, that argument makes sense to a point. But mixing in mono is so much more for me. I'm going to show a really, really easy example. Let's open up our mixer. And in this case, this is something, I'm not sure if you're aware of how easy this is to do. And this is a good tip regardless if you're using any interface. If I was to play this, okay, we're going to focus on that. Let me find the toms over here. So here are the two tom hits over here. Okay, take a look at our main outs. I have my listen bus active, but let's ignore that for a moment. Take a look at our main outs. Over here we have channel mode. Watch what happens when I collapse this. When you collapse your channel mode into mono, what it's doing is essentially it's folding everything down. Now, obviously, or at least to my ears, it's doing some type of gain compensation where the gain levels aren't changing. It's just that we lose our stereo field. And in fact, if I listen to everything, everything's just mono. It's all folded up on top of each other. And now we have this beautiful stereo field. But let's focus in on these two tom hits. If we take a listen to these are both at 0, so it's pretty easy for me to make an adjustment. Let me bring this one down. Okay, I'm going to bring this into stereo, and let's solo this. Tom 1 and tom 3. Take a look. It's kind of hard to place exactly, have a listen to that. We knew that they were both at 0. If I pull this down to minus 4.8, it doesn't sound that bad. If I push it up to like 2.3, okay, maybe it sounds a little bit loud there, but it's kind of hard to determine where they sit and what the relative level is against each other. And they're not panned out that hard. They're like left 45, right 45. Let's hop into mono for a second. Okay, I could definitely hear that was too loud. Now that one kind of dropped off way too low. Let's put it back to 0. It becomes much easier to discern when elements are popping out of a mix when you fold something down to mono. Not only does it do it from a level perspective, but it also, at least to me, it does it from an EQ perspective. What do I mean by this? Okay, I'm sure that you've heard or watched lots of tutorials where people talk about, for example, multi-tracking, maybe like electric guitars. And quite often it's said that they say, okay, we're going to pan this out hard left and hard right. And if you want it to really have a great stereo effect, you make a small change. So that could be changing the pickup or changing the amp or having a different setting. In the case that you're using an amp simulation, that you would dial in a completely different tone that has a difference. And that actually makes it sound really thick and really full. And if you did it with the exact same thing, it could sound actually weird. When you fold stereo sources on top of each other, not only are we able to determine, and this is also the same for things like background vocals. So for example, let's say you had a stack of background vocals. You had like a main vocal, and then you had some harmonies that were happening in the background. If you're listening to them and they're panned out hard left and hard right, or varying degrees of the stereo field, when you listen to them, sometimes it can be hard to know when something is placed in a mix. And then guess what? You bounce it out to your phone. You listen back on your phone. You're holding your phone away from you. You go over that part and you're like, oh, geez, you make a note to yourself. That one line is 3 dBs too loud. But it didn't sound 3 dB too loud when you were listening to it either on headphones or on speakers. But it was so obvious and so evident when you were listening on a phone. Now, a lot of these new phones, you flip them in landscape mode and they actually do a stereo where they have a speaker on each side. So, but in some cases, if you're listening upright and you just hold it like that, which is a lot of times how I'll listen to something, things pop out. So what I find is that when I mix in mono, I like to place my things obviously in the stereo field. I get it working. I get it so it sounds nice and full, right? I'm listening to everything. Let's go back here, these elements over here. So I hear the vibes. We got some strings that are going to come in. We have a guitar that's off to the right. I have my reverbs. I have everything. It's filling out the stereo field nice. But now when I pop it into mono, I want to make sure I'm hearing my bass, my kick, the vibes, the guitar. I still hear the guitar. I can hear these strings. Mixing in mono, not only for mono compatibility, but because it forces you to hear things in a different way. The other thing it does is it folds things over top of each other. And when you fold two elements over top of each other, that is where you have the ability to create separation or to realize that there's masking happening. By listening to them in mono, you can hear that there's masking happening on certain frequencies. Then you have a choice to make level adjustments as well as EQ adjustments, or maybe saturation adjustments, or maybe you need to make a change to a delay that is doing something weird to the phase when it gets collapsed in mono. There are, I wouldn't say problems, but mixing in mono gives you insights into things that wouldn't otherwise be evident when you're just mixing in stereo. So for that reason, my typical workflow is after I get things kind of balanced out and panned out where I like them to be, once I get them to where I like them to be, and I'm generally happy with the level, I will spend a huge amount of time in mono. And I find that the better I can make, the better and the more separated I can make my mix sound in mono. I make my EQ decisions, for example, in mono. If I'm EQing two overlapping harmonies, or if I'm filtering things, and I have them panned out hard left and hard right, I actually make those decisions in mono. Why? Because I can completely hear when something is too loud in context of the whole mix. I can hear if something is poking out, and also sometimes I want something to poke out. I want it to sit on top of everything. I do that in mono. When I want to have a certain EQ that might be different, or I need to differentiate two sounds that sound too similar, or I need to do something different to them, I will fold them over top of each other, and I will get them to work together in terms of level against anything else that they need to be relative to. And then any EQ decisions in terms of low end or anything like that, I do that in mono. It sounds weird because guess what? This doesn't sound as good as this does. But this gives me a lot of information. This gives me insights. And the better I can get everything to work, and the better I can get everything to sound, and the more I can have things have their own space and their own room, their own ambience, if I can get it to work in mono, when I pop out of mono, it's beautiful. I love it. And it actually sounds better to me. But you'd be surprised at how good you'll be able to get your mixes to translate when you start embracing mono. And like I said, for me, I thought about it for all the wrong reasons at first. I thought about it for, we don't need to worry about that anymore. This is stereo, or nobody's ever going to listen to it. It's not about that. That is part of the benefit. They're getting something to translate in mono. That is part of the deal, but it's not the whole deal. Because the way that you're able to make EQ decisions and the way that you're able to discern exactly where something should be placed in terms of getting something to be balanced when you're working in mono, it's very easy. I don't know any other way to explain it than that. And I also use this mono trick. I combine two tricks. This is something I've spoken about in the past. I've done videos on using my mid-range mix check tip, which is basically just an EQ that's filtering off the top end and the bottom end, and it's focusing the sound and it's reducing the level. When I do that, I also bring it down to mono. So I'm actually listening when I'm making like fine tuning on certain elements. I'm doing it on a mid-range version of the song if I'm trying to really get something dialed in, and also I'm doing it in mono. And with those two moves, when I come out of mono and then bring it back into stereo, and when I get it right, it works. So anyways, super easy to do in Studio One, but even if you're working in other DAWs, I know there's plugins that will automatically do some type of fold down. The thing you have to be careful of is you want to make sure that the level change is not drastic. You don't want anything to be, and I'm pretty sure this is just something that's compensated for in Studio One, but very easy to do in Studio One, and doesn't matter whether you're running a Presonus interface or a third-party interface. This main outs, click this in mono, get your balances working, do your EQ moves in mono, do your balances in mono. Watch how magical it is when you get it right in mono, and then bring it back into stereo. Anyways, hope that you enjoyed this video. We'll catch you for more in the next one. Cheers.